Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Filling You In. Now, if I wanted a gaming laptop which could very easily double up as a replacement for a full-blown desktop workstation, and portability was ultimately a necessary but secondary priority for me from a purchasing perspective, I'd probably buy this thing. It's the Alienware M15 R4, now outfitted with Nvidia's latest 3000 series graphics chips. Now with the Alienware M15 R4, there's a number of configuration options you can get. Now they all come with 32 gigabytes of RAM. The top spec version comes with an Intel 10980HK and an Nvidia 3080 GPU. But this model is the entry-level spec, and it's no slouch either, as you'll see from the benchmarks a little bit later on. It's got an Intel 10870H and an Nvidia 3070 GPU, but most importantly, it comes with the 125 watts maximum TDP, or the power draw, available to it, which means it is the most powerful 3070 you can get right now in a gaming laptop. Of course, if you want a laptop that provides workstation levels of power, you need to accept some degree of portability loss. This is a 15-inch display, but its overall chassis, in order to accommodate the cooling system that is required to keep this thing performing at its best, is pretty chunky compared with other 15-inch models. And that's not just 15-inch models in the more thin and light space, even compared to, say, the Razer Blade 15. This is pretty bulky by way of comparison. In terms of its weight though, actually, it doesn't weigh that much more. At about 2.1 kilos, it's far from heavy, but equally, no one could possibly consider it light either. In terms of its overall design and its aesthetic, I really like it actually. The white and black finish looks super cool and crisp, and it says gamer without absolutely screaming it in your face. That being said, it is a gaming laptop, and we'd be remiss to not comment on the RGB options available. We've got RGB options in the Alienware power icon, in the backlit keyboard, for the Alienware icon on the reverse side of the display, and on the rear housing for the rear I/O and the exhaust fans as well. This really cool oval shaped LED bar, all of which is configurable in Alienware's FX software, which can be set to your heart's content, whatever kind of RGB party disco you really want to entertain, up to and including turning it off if either that's not your thing or you just want to save that little bit extra battery life. Alienware is ultimately a brand under the Dell banner, and Dell, as you would expect, should be producing good keyboards, and this is absolutely no exception. In terms of gaming, it feels like it actuates really fast, no complaints in that regard. And when I was doing long periods of productivity level typing, I got up to speed really quickly, super comfortable to use, and just a really satisfying click sound as you're typing away at high speed. And my only complaint would be the placement of the page up, page down keys by the arrow keys. You just find yourself clubbing it all the time. I prefer it just personally when the page up and page down keys are positioned away, ideally at the top end near the function keys. Now, the quality of the keyboard unfortunately doesn't extend to the trackpad itself, which is firstly pitiful in terms of size, and then secondly, it's got this really annoying click or wobble type sound when you do the downward tap. I'm not sure if you can hear it through the lavalier mic, but it's just really annoying. I don't like it. I can just about forgive the size of the trackpad. Ultimately, it's a gaming laptop, so the vast majority of users are going to be using a full-on gaming mouse. But when you compare it to, say, the Razer Blade 15, which includes a really sizable, really good trackpad, this is just another example of where this thing is well suited to being a workstation or dedicated sort of static laptop rather than a full-on portable device. And with this Alienware model, you won't want to be wandering far away from a power outlet anyway. First of all, you've got to lug around a 240 watt charging brick just to keep this thing alive. And then second of all, even just doing light touch productivity work, I only got an hour and a half's battery life out of this thing. As far as the display goes, it's a 1080p HD display with a traditional 16:9 aspect ratio. It's got 300 hertz refresh rate, which means, as you'll see from the benchmarks later, there's no chance you're going to be leaving any frames on the table. It's also got a 100% coverage of the sRGB color gamut, so it's not going to be half bad at all for creative professionals either. But it does have a fairly measly 300 nits of peak brightness, which isn't outside of the trend as far as gaming laptops go, but isn't brilliant compared to some of the other more premium productivity type machines that we see on the market right now. If you're working in low lit conditions or a fairly standard lighting room, you're going to be okay. But if you're in a brightly lit room or for some reason you're gaming outdoors, then you're definitely going to struggle. The bezels on the sides and the top are nice and thin and give the laptop a really clean look, albeit the bezels at the bottom are obviously still quite thick. Could have been improved, the display, so if they put in a 16:10 aspect ratio. And on that note, in 2021, we're starting to see a lot of 16:10 aspect ratio gaming laptops actually coming to the market. So get subscribed right now so you don't miss that when it comes up. Nestled in the top bezel, we have ourselves a 720p webcam, which is about as good, or rather as poor, as every other 720p webcam. It doesn't support Windows Hello facial recognition either, which is disappointing because there is no fingerprint or thumbprint sensor anywhere on the keyboard deck either. Keeping with that trend of this thing potentially being a replacement for a full-on desktop PC, you'll have absolutely no need for a docking station because this thing is crawling with ports. Taking a look at the left side of the device, we have ourselves a full-on Ethernet jack, which I just never see anymore, full-size USB Type A and a headphone jack. On the right side, did I say left side last time? Oh, well, anyway, who cares? We've got a micro SD card slot, two full-size USB Type A's, but it doesn't end there either. On the back side, we've got even more ports. So we have HDMI port, micro display port, Thunderbolt 3, which is also capable of charging the device, something you'll probably be interested in if you do want to take this on the road and not lug around the 240 watt charging brick. You have the option to purchase an aftermarket adapter, something more lightweight for your travel bag. We've also got this, which is a eGPU port. And last but not least, we've got the barrel connector for the 240 watt charging brick that this thing comes with. Now, we've actually got some pretty good speakers on this thing. They sit at the top end of the device, just below the screen, and they're actually pretty darn good. Even at the low end with bass and treble, I found the sound really good and really engaging. Let's take a listen. Unfortunately, for all the good those four-way stereo speakers bring to this device, it's all lost when this thing ramps up because the fans are just that loud. And they have to be loud at the end of the day to get the kind of power out of this thing that the Alienware M15 R4 manages to achieve. It's got a fantastic cooling system with exhaust vents all over the place on both the left and right side of the device, on the rear side as well, where the rear I/O is located, and on the underside of the chassis as well. In terms of thermals, inside Alienware's Fusion software, we have the ability to set a number of thermal profiles. If we put this thing in the cool state and we're using it on battery, on your lap, it's not bad at all. As I said, you won't be using it on your lap for long because the battery life is appalling, but while you're doing so, it is comfortable. When this thing's plugged back in and put on something like performance mode, for instance, it does get warm. You won't want to use it on your lap for long, but as we said at the start, this laptop isn't really aimed at being ultra portable, it's really aimed at being a portable workstation. And as such, you're probably going to be playing with this thing at a table, at which point the surface temperatures on the underside of the chassis are irrelevant. Obviously, the surface temperatures on the top side of the chassis and the keyboard are important, and it does get hot. But the most important thing I can say is that it doesn't get hot around the WSAD keys for when you're playing first-person shooter type games. Alienware's Fusion software also comes pre-configured with 2 overclocked profiles, and it also gives you the ability to fully configure those important overclocking settings and parameters yourself as well if you want to extract every single last frame of performance from this device. So with that being said, let's see just how good the performance of this device really is. In terms of those Fusion software pre-configured options, I've set this to the second of the 2 highest pre-configured overclocking profiles, and in terms of its thermal performance, we've set it to the performance mode, as well as this seems to be the most likely area that the average user will be operating within. And in terms of comparisons, we've got a few interesting options in here, so we can see how this stacks up against the 2070 Super in my desktop gaming PC. We'll also see how it compares to the 3070 95 watt TDP graphics card that was in the Razer Blade 15 that we looked at recently. You can check that out up there if you're interested. And we'll see how that compares to this, the 125 watt max TDP available in this 3070. Let's go. There are no major shocks in Cinebench R23, where in multi-core scores it performed about 5% better than the Razer Blade 15, but couldn't come anywhere near the Ryzen 7 3700X workhorse that I've got in my desktop PC. And in terms of single core performance, it was a little bit on the low side compared with the Razer Blade 15, but again, that shouldn't really be considered a shocker at the end of the day, as the Razer Blade 15 had a more powerful CPU. And it was all but the same story in Geekbench as well, albeit this time the Alienware falling a little bit behind the Razer Blade 15, albeit well within the margin of error, and again pretty much the same margin of difference in single core performance as well. In more productivity oriented benchmarks using Puget Bench, which is a benchmark of performance in Adobe Premiere Pro, it was even Stevens between the Alienware and the Razer Blade, neither of which can perform as well as the Ryzen 7 3700X in a desktop. And unfortunately, as far as SSD speeds go, actually, it was pretty disappointing with the Alienware. But it's in the graphical tests where this thing really comes into its own and proves itself as a gaming workhorse. In the Geekbench OpenCL benchmark, it had an 8% lead over the Razer Blade 15, but most importantly, absolutely smashed the dedicated 2070 Super in my dedicated gaming PC. And it was the same story in Vulkan as well, where it held a 13% lead over the Razer Blade 15, showing just what that 125 watt draw GPU is capable of doing. In 3D Mark Time Spy, it had a 15% lead over the Razer Blade 15 once more, and was basically even Stevens in comparison with the 2070 Super. And into the gaming benchmarks, the Alienware continues to reign supreme. In Overwatch at epic settings, we had a 15% lead over both the Razer Blade 15 and the 2070 Super in the desktop, albeit we didn't really see any noticeable improvement in the Deus Ex Mankind Divided benchmark test, where averages were in and around the same number. Moving on to the real modern day benchmark test though, in Cyberpunk with ray tracing disabled and DLSS set to quality, there was a moderate 3.5% improvement over the Razer Blade 15. And then when we switch to ray tracing enabled, we really start to see a performance difference with a 6.5% average improvement over that Razer Blade 15 once again. But potentially saving the best for last, in The Witcher 3 in ultra settings, this 125 watt 3070 utterly comes into its own with a 25.5% advantage over the 3070 90 watt GPU in the Razer Blade 15. So what's the quick and simple verdict? Well, if portability is your primary concern, do not buy this thing. Go and consider something like the Razer Blade 15 instead. It's a far more well-rounded gaming laptop that you can get right now for not dissimilar sums of money. Ultimately, this is going to be aimed at people who have portability as a secondary concern, but a concern they do have from time to time. This is better suited to those people who don't have the space for a full-blown desktop workstation, or potentially those people who want a desktop gaming PC but can't get their hands on a 3000 series graphics card right now. That's it for today. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.